thank you, William. It's a real pleasure. I'm enjoying our conversation immensely.
Me too, very, very much. David, let's get to the core of where you seem to be living now and where I think your work is taking you into this idea of how do we activate the light body? Are we in the process of ascension? What can we do to accelerate that ascension? And isn't it okay that we all become great masters and yogis?
That's a wonderful question. I start by pointing people not to the Shroud of Turin story, which some people have tried to debunk, but to the records from India and Tibet, wherein we have 160,000 written, documented cases of people dematerializing their bodies at the time of their choosing, which you could kind of say is death, but in a way all they're doing is they chant mantras and they go into the state of consciousness, and in some of these, there's 3 different types of cases of what can happen. And I'll go from the least intense to the most intense. And I know you know about this already, but I'm telling this for the benefit of the viewers.
Yeah, please.
The least intense case is where somebody comes to a point of natural death. Again, it's conscious. They chant at the end the mantras. Then their body just kind of stops working. The instructions that have been given from time immemorial, because this is a long-honored process in Tibet and China and India, is that you wrap the body and you don't disturb it for 7 days. Now, what happens is, during those 7 days, sometimes through the wrappings, people have seen the body. First of all, the age appears to regress. The skin gets pinkish, and the lines on the face seem to have vanished. It almost is like there's a reversal in time that's taking place. But here's the crazy part. The body actually begins shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And it actually shrinks down to such an extent that what you're left with is a roughly human-shaped piece of charred ash that's only about maybe 5 or 6 inches tall. During the time that this is happening, there are all sorts of anomalous experiences that people report in and around the area, including smelling incense, hearing angelic-sounding music, and most interestingly, based on what we're discussing here, William, they see rainbows. They see rainbows in the room. They see rainbows over the hut wherever it's happening. They see rainbows in the sky, and it's not just a little bit, it's like a great profusion of this. So the actual term in Tibetan is Jalus, spelled J-A-L-U-S, which literally translates as rainbow body. That's the practice. So they are literally transforming themselves into light, which then appears as rainbows, sacred smells, and sacred sounds. So that's the first type. Now the second type is pretty much the same. The person chants mantras, they stop breathing, you wrap up their bod for 7 days, the body shrinks down, except in this case, they may not leave anything of themselves behind at all. Sometimes they leave behind hair and fingernails. Sometimes they've also left behind the septum from the nose, but again, this is done deliberately so that they can give their devotees something to remember them by as sort of like a keepsake. Also, I should report that in both of these 2 cases, number 1 and number 2, these people will appear in dreams, and in some cases full materialization in what you would call a light body form after the time of their alleged death. Then, topic area number 3, the final one of the 3 here, is where people reach the end of their lives, they chant the mantras, they do everything they're supposed to do, and in this case, there's a spontaneous light body activation. They literally burst in light right in front of your eyes, and whoop, they're gone. And then after that, they can basically appear wherever they want, they can do miraculous things, which again is something they've already done for a long time. But this is something that is extensively described in books by Namkhai Norbu, who describes the Dzogchen Buddhism, which is basically Tibetan Buddhism, spelled D-Z-O-G-C-H-E-N. And you got to realize that before you ever get to the point that you're going to do this, you already have some really spectacular abilities, including the lungam, which is actually a practice where they run and every step they take, they shoot like 100 feet through the air and about 30 feet high.
Wow.
And they can travel huge, huge distances in a single day by using this practice. And one of the things I did in my book is I went through all the reports of lungam and actually analyzed it based on this peer science I was telling you about in the previous episode of our show here.
Right.
And what they found, what I found was that all the reports of how they did it, what time of day they could do it, that they had to avoid certain types of terrain, they preferred flat land, it all correlates with the pyramid stuff in that it appears that the way that they're able to counteract gravity is harnessing this spin field that's intrinsic within gravity. The spin field is dramatically altered by the shape of any particular objects in an area. So when you have mountains and uneven terrain, you get uneven spin fields. And that means it only is the very, very most advanced lungam practitioners who can actually travel through those mountainous regions because you have to negotiate all these spin fields. Another thing I found very interesting is in the Tibetan practice of lungam, they describe how you cannot wake somebody up while they're doing this. You have to go to a deep state of trance. And if you wake that person up, then it says the spirit that's within that person tries to leave them so quickly that their body actually has a sudden convulsion and they immediately die. Wow. And apparently there's some sort of tissue damage that happens as well. So what I describe this in my book as is that their bodies are actually half dematerialized into the light body already. And that's what's allowing them to counteract gravity, is that they literally are so light that you can just get this run going and you barely even touch the ground. But when you do touch the ground, you can spring off of it and shoot like, hundreds of feet at a time. So, again, by the time you reach this state where you activate your light body in the Tibetan tradition, another thing they can do is they actually use a form of channeling. But unlike the channeling that I do or that anybody else has done, this is where they literally go back and look at a book that's in some sort of obscure temple somewhere that has the scrolls are all dusty and buried under the dirt, and you got to dig it out and find the scrolls. But when you dig up these treasure chests or wherever it is that they've been buried, it turns out that they've channeled the text. And even if it's hundreds of years old, they grade themselves, get this, William, based on whether or not they've got 100% of the words correct.
Wow.
So for them, a failing grade would be like, oh, well, yeah, okay, here I was supposed to say glory and I said grace.
Right.
And here I was supposed to say ascension and I said transfiguration. Mm-hmm. That's what we're talking about.
Amazing.
So this is what we're being led through, I believe, as a planet, that even though certain Olympic athletes of spirituality can sort of run the marathon race and graduate from here before its time, I would not in any way undermine the process that each of us is going through in our lives day by day, where we are being crucified. The crucifixion of Jesus was not merely a symbolic event because he's the one and only Son of God and nobody else is going to have to go through that. There's plenty of esoteric sources that say that Jesus' crucifixion was intended to be the most recent of an ongoing series of hero metaphors that we've been given by people who are very much real and who very much access what you could call intelligent infinity. They do break through and part the veil and realize their true self. Mm-hmm. But it's not something that's only supposed to happen to Jesus. You take any fundamentalist Christian, you sit them down with the Bible, you open it to John 14:12, and you say, read this. And it says, from Jesus, as I do these things, meaning all the miracles, so shall ye do them, and greater things, for I go unto my Father. Now then you say, well, what does he mean when he says, for I go unto my Father? The Father is the universal consciousness. So what's happening is, in order for Jesus to reach that light body state, and again, the Shroud of Turin is very interesting. There's a three-dimensional holographic image burned as a photographic negative into the cloth, and the only parts they ever carbon dated were the parts that were repaired after it had been burned.
Exactly.
So think about that. It's so stupid, right? Of course
it really
it's going to
is.
carbon date wrong. It carbon dated to exactly when it was put in. But the rest of it, if you look at the bottom, there was a study that came out late last year that said the body was levitating because the buttocks aren't like spread out like they should be if the weight was on them. So I mean, this is not just easily explained away as something that Leonardo da Vinci painted onto a cloth.
Right. David, I want to get back to the rainbow body just for a moment.
Absolutely.
I want to do that by telling just a brief story about how I started studying it and get your comment on it.
Yeah, I'm talking too much anyway, so go for it.
No. I want you to talk. You're
okay.
The guest. I was at a UFO conference. Well, it was the Bay Area UFO Expo, which I know you've spoken at several times. And
oh, yeah.
It might have been the one we spoke at together a few years ago. And this couple came up to me and introduced themselves. They had watched my DVDs about ancient Egyptian stargates and how the ancient Egyptian ships of the gods look exactly like the way modern science draws a wormhole. And then they told me that they both had PhDs from the Harvard Divinity School. They knew the Dalai Lama. They translate Tibetan text. They lived in India. They focus on the rainbow body.
I like where this is going.
Yeah, and so what they said is that you answered for us a question that the Tibetans wouldn't answer or perhaps couldn't answer, and that was, the Tibetans say that this rainbow body teaching is taught in 13 star systems in addition to our own.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And
now, this is because they actually met with the Tibetans personally?
Yes.
So this was like one of those teachings that you don't get in all the books, but if you actually talk to them, they'll tell you?
Yes.
That's
and
incredible.
I have seen it referenced in a book that they directed me to.
Wow.
They don't name the star systems, but they do say that this teaching is taught in 13 star systems, which suggests Earth is connected to these other 13 star systems. And, of course, there's 13 mains with stars over their heads in the painting of George Washington in the Capitol. But what they said is that when the rainbow body is activated, they spin the body into a vortex of energy, and then they can travel to these other 13 star systems. But the Tibetans never would say how they get there.
Oh, my gosh.
And what they said is that after watching my DVDs, it came to them that it must be that what they're doing is opening wormholes.
Well, your work has been so amazing. You've been consistent for so many years. I remember even back in the 90s, people dropping your name, and I'm like, okay, you know. But, I mean, over time, I'm like, yeah, William Henry, okay, I got it. And the Stargate principle is very much true. In fact, I am very blessed to have spoken with multiple insiders who have unimpeachably demonstrated credibility, including showing me documents and photographs that they should not have that would have gotten them in a lot of trouble. And I mean, your jaw hits the floor when you see some of the stuff I've seen. And these guys have showed me clear and ongoing witness testimonies in which I collect this stuff, I keep it to myself, I don't publicize a lot of what I know, so that if somebody new comes along and they start telling me the same stuff that everybody else is telling me, then either there's a ridiculous conspiracy to defraud me, or they're talking about something that's real.
Right.
And I actually found out just recently from one of these insiders, who's very credible, that there is an ancient Stargate that is located in southeast Iraq. It does look like what you see in the Stargate television show for the most part. It is actually a ring. It's about 20, 30 feet tall, and it has pillars that surround it, and it is literally sitting out there in the desert. But it's been surrounded by all these government buildings and installations, and they have very carefully tried to avoid it being used by anybody to get in here. But what I've heard from these insiders is that Stargate technology breaks down into two different types. There's an ancient type and a modern type. The ancient type does involve this wild and crazy wormhole ride. The modern type is an instantaneous, and you just go from one place to another. You hardly even feel anything.
Right.
It does appear that the ancient gates have been installed on this planet for a long, long time, but let's not forget, the principle that they're using doesn't require technology. It's only that the technology helps it along.
Well, I'm so glad you said that, because we have to take a quick break, David. And when we come back, I want to ask you about that. Can human flesh go through these gates, or, as the ancients seem to be suggesting, the only way to go through these gates is in pure form, as a light being with a pure heart? But we'll take a break, David, and when we come back, let's talk about that. All right, this is Revelations. We'll be right back.
Have you heard Egypt calling? Now is the time to answer. William Henry has places available for Stargate Egypt 5, his Ultimate Egypt Tour, January 18th to the 30th, 2011. Join a small group on the journey of a lifetime, carefully designed and led by William to focus on ancient Egypt's extraordinary Stargate symbolism and enlightening metaphysics. Enjoy private time in the Great Pyramid and between the paws of the Sphinx. Sail the Nile, experience timeless landscapes, come face to face with the past, and maybe aspects of yourself long forgotten. William Henry's Stargate Egypt tours are affordable 5-star tours and are operated by Abercrombie & Kent, the world's foremost luxury travel company. Discover ancient Egypt. Discover yourself. Both are greater than you ever imagined. For information, visit williamhenry.net. That's williamhenry.net.
This is Whitley Strieber, and I'm back chatting live with UnknownCountry.com subscribers from 7 to 8 p.m. Pacific Time in the UnknownCountry.com subscriber section. UnknownCountry.com subscriber section. Dreamland going back all the way to 2004. Hundreds of remarkable special interviews, including things you literally will never hear again, such as the wonderful Lawrence Gardner, who recently passed away, but left a deposit of amazing information in our subscriber section. Don't miss it. UnknownCountry.com. Join us today. Go to the UnknownCountry.com website, click on the subscribe tab, and get started. It is unique in the world. It doesn't cost a whole lot of money, and it is worth a whole lot of your interest and time. You need us, and we need you.
You're listening to the Revelations of William Henry.
We're continuing with David Wilcock. Okay, David, what is it? Can you go through a Stargate in flesh form, or is a dematerialization into light body form required? Sort of like the story of Osiris, right? Cut into 15 pieces, then he's reassembled at another location. Couldn't this be a dematerialization or a deatomization and a rematerialization at another location?
You're exactly right. On the inside, the rematerialization, as you call it, they call it particleization. Mm-hmm. So you get dematerialization on one side and particleization on the other.
Okay.
It absolutely is the case. Your body is a projection of what you could call spirit. And technically, in the Black Ops projects, they often call it the transient, which is a really silly name because transient means something that's meaningless and unimportant.
Yeah.
But that kind of shows their attitude.
Interesting.
So your transient, as they call it, is what you have to go into in order to go through these gates. You actually do dematerialize and you rematerialize somewhere else. And remember now, the reason why this works is because, as I was saying in the first show, there is a fluid-like energy that flows into every planet to make the planets exist. It's a gravitational field that's much more than just gravity. It actually is the energy of consciousness, it's the energy of health and healing, and it's actually contained in a higher dimension. Now, because this gravitational flow is not localized within 3 space. It's not in our 3-dimensional reality. When you have a tube or a conduit that is naturally created by a vortex flow between 2 stars, when you go into that tube, you're not in 3 space, and you're going to pop from one side to the other very quickly. So like if you see the movie Contact, there's a series of stopover points that Jodie Foster's character, Ellie, goes through as she goes to the final destination. And again, I'm working on this film Convergence with the guy that wrote the script with Carl Sagan, sat with him for 2 years. And he doesn't know anything. He actually was never clued in on the real secrets that were being disclosed in the movie.
Incredible.
Which is astonishing. I mean, I've asked him so many times. But he does know that Carl Sagan was adamant that this movie represented our future. And a future that we can grab if we're ready for it. And I think that it's going to pay. Carl Sagan was really, really intent on trying to find a scientific backing for what he was saying in his movie. And he did find that by looking at Einstein-Rosen bridges, which is basically what we call a wormhole from 2 black holes. So the fact is that we do have this Stargate technology now. It's all over the Earth, and it's all over the galaxy. It does appear that there are elders, or ancients as they've been called, who show up on a planet before human life would start to be there. They set up the game. They build the stargates so that people can come and go to help the planet along in its evolution. But the gate is also something like, as you said, you can't just walk in. Especially in the ancient systems where you're actually building pyramids or something like Stonehenge, and there is no actual technology like a ring. It's not just about going there and saying, okay, guys, beam me up. You have to understand the physics of how the Earth works, how the solar system works. I go into this extensively in my new book, where you have geometry in terms of where the pyramid has to be built. That's the global grid. But then there's other geometry inside the Earth, and it's all in rotation, and it's counter-rotating. So one of these rotational cycles is 388 days long, and it was discovered by two German scientists, Groznia Fossar and Franz Bludorf. They have fossar-bludorf.com as their website. And they wrote about Gariev and all the stuff about DNA, where Gariev actually zaps salamander eggs and then shoots the laser into frog eggs. The frog eggs rewrite into a salamander.
Right.
And that was kind of like the scientific backing I needed to show that galactic energy could rewrite our DNA and change us.
Uh-huh.
But they also show that there's this thing they call the TLR, or temporary local risk factor, where you look at where a plane goes down or has electrical failure, 388 days later, come back to the same spot, and it's going to happen again. So they concluded that there has to be some sort of geometry, and they say it's a straight line, and it's rotating inside the Earth somehow, causes these wormholes to open. So if we understood how these portals open and when they open, which is all based on physics, all you have to do is know where the geometry is, which also includes, of course, the geometry of the planetary orbits. I do this in my book, too, the work of John Martineau, where he actually geometrically analyzes the planetary orbits and concludes that they're all based on the platonic solids. The platonic solid relationships do hold the planets where they belong, just like Kepler was postulating in the 1600s. He was right. And he got that because of ancient wisdom that's been kept in these secret societies. He was trying to model it, and he couldn't figure it out at the time, but Martineau has done it. So that's why they were so keen on planetary alignments. Because if you think about it, when you have a trine, that's a triangle, which is a tetrahedron. When you have a square, that's a cube or an octahedron. And even if you get into quintiles or sesquiquadrates, you got a dodecahedron because you got a five-sided symmetry. So literally what I'm telling you is that the reason why the ancient people built these monuments that were aligned to the stars is because when you know what the geometry is like, and you know how to line up the geometry out there in space, the geometry that's rotating inside the Earth and where you are on the surface of the Earth, hence the grid. If you go to the right place at the right time and you build the stone resonator that'll help you to do it, you are definitely going to open up a wormhole and go wherever you want. So when you see the Bermuda Triangle, these things seem to be happening randomly, but it's only because we don't understand when they open.
Fascinating. You know, I live here in Nashville. We have an amazing stone circle here. It's at the top of a 2,200-foot-long magician's rod with each of the 7 chakras perfectly marked with appropriate symbolism.
Really?
Topped by this, it's completely built of Egyptian temple technology. It's really amazing. And as I've been studying it, I've been intrigued this notion of that the way they used these stone circles in the past was each individual person, the stones hold the charge themselves. The person could stand against the stone, receive the charge, and then the whole group that's standing in the circle would then be able to share the energy collectively so that each individual could then receive the energy of the collective.
Right, I remember you called it a bliss hit, and I really like that term.
Yeah. Then the person in the middle could be like Elijah going up in the whirlwind, would simply be able to kind of blip out. And I find that such a fascinating approach. David, we've just got a little bit of time left. Before we go, I need to talk with you or ask you about a visit I made this summer to James Gilliland's dormant volcano up there at Mount Adams, Washington.
I know all about that.
Yeah, and I wanted to get your comment on this idea that what we see in the sky, because this goes to the disclosure work that you do, that the ships that we see in the sky, some of them are metallic-type craft, but others are these transformed humans. They're the organic craft. What are your thoughts on that possibility?
Absolutely correct. There is no question that we have been lied to about who we are. And if you remember, my favorite part of Bill Ryan's speech when he was on the stage in Zurich at the same conference I was speaking at was when he described a retired military guy who was inside the Black Ops and said that the single biggest reason why everything was being covered up, it's not the free energy, it's not the fact that they're suppressing healing technology that could blow out the pharmaceutical industry and eliminate the need for drugs and medicine. The real deepest reason why they're keeping this secret is that when we understand the metaphysical potential of our own being, the simple fact that people would realize that that was true would actually change the physics and make it so that we could do these things.
Interesting.
So it's the simple fact that once it's like a 100th monkey effect. Mm-hmm. This was another thing. If you see a Project Camelot video I did where I interviewed Dr. Pete Peterson, he's one of the most high-level witnesses ever to come forward and be filmed on camera. He did get in trouble for doing it, by the way. They really chewed his ass out for having done this video with us. But he's told me much more than what's in the video. I can assure you of that. But what he says in the video is absolutely jaw-dropping nonetheless. But one of the things he said that I found so intriguing was that the reason why guys like Ed Leeds-Skalnin had to work on Coral Castle by themselves is that in these Black Ops projects, they have concluded that the laws of physics actually change depending on who is there while something is going on. That's how some people see a UFO and some people don't. I'm sure you've heard that. And like you're saying, with these humans flying through the air, some people see them and some people don't. So you might be at James Gilliland's ranch and all these people are like going, oh my God, what's that? And they're all pointing at it, and then somebody else is like, oh, I don't see anything. Right. You know, because the physics changes. And so Leeds-Skalnin could levitate the blocks when he was by himself, but if you have a skeptic, well, I don't believe that, then it's not going to levitate. Because the universe says, oh, you're right, it doesn't work. I'm sorry, my bad. Here, it's not going to work. The universe basically responds to our intention. So if you don't believe something is going to work, then it won't. But, again, the laws of physics would change if they told us what we can really do, and people would be able to start doing it, and at that point they have completely lost control of the planet.
Exactly. Because until then, the average person is listening to this or hearing some of this, and it happens in my presentations, and I always make the joke about the two caterpillars looking up at the butterfly saying to each other, you'll never get me up in one of those. That's where we're at. We don't believe. We don't have images. We're not shown that this is what's intrinsic within us, latent within us, waiting to come out. In fact, that may be the only way we leave this matrix, this planet.
I absolutely feel that's true. It's about belief. When you read, I was really fascinated when I was a kid with a lot of things. But one of them was telekinesis, and I was straining myself to try to find a book that could tell me how to levitate things with my mind. Mm-hmm. And although I never got it to work, except for rotating a little paper windmill on top of a needle, the books would consistently say, the only thing that's stopping you from doing this is whether you really believe you can. And so if you're raised in a culture like in Tibet, where you're told about this stuff, where you see people doing it, it comes very naturally. If you go into these spoon-bending seminars people do,
sure,
everybody starts being able to bend spoons. Why?
Right.
Because you're seeing it happen all around you. Then your mind is like, oh, yeah, well, I can do this. Everybody else is doing it. I don't want to be left out. And all of a sudden you can, because the laws of physics change based on who's there and what they think. So the thoughts that we want to cultivate here are thoughts of love, thoughts of forgiveness, thoughts of acceptance of others despite our differences, apparent differences, because that's really what this whole ascension and transfiguration game is about. It is about not reincarnating as a human again. Every time you reincarnate as a human, you're working through the karma process, which involves learning through pain, suffering, and misery. You can't get around that. If you have negative thoughts about somebody, you cut yourself, or you stub your toe, or you bang your head against the ceiling. Ah, Jesus! You know? Well, yes, it is Jesus. It's the higher self that the Christ represents.
Right. And
it's giving you a message. These things don't happen randomly. You don't have a random accident. You don't have a random bad luck. Everything is being guided by higher beings that work extensively behind the scenes to lead us through experiences, we can get cynical and nasty and think that they don't exist. Doesn't change one iota the fact that we're all living in this grand illusion where the thoughts and actions that we create are returned back to us. That is how it will always work. Whether you believe it or not, it's going to happen anyway, so you should at least spend some time thinking about it, because you might start to want to look at things, especially when things go bad, and say, is there a correlation with something that I might have done to someone or something that I was thinking that could have been, self-serving and not really in everyone's higher good?
Right. Well, David, that's the end of our time that we have for today, but I am really looking forward to our presentation in November. Was there anything you wanted to say about that?
Well, I definitely think you and I should take the stage together. I think we're flowing very well, and I want to be able to dialogue with you more about your side of this, because a lot of people who are going to listen to this are going to be on my website. They don't really know maybe that much about your work, but I just think that the synergy between what you've brought together with what I've got is so phenomenal, because there is so much evidence that the Founding Fathers really were on top of this, and they knew that they were paving the way for this Novus Ordo Seclorum, this new secular order that's coming into being. It's not the New World Order. These guys now, in modern times, have gotten way off track. And I think that's an important point that we're going to discuss as well. And so you have so much more of that information than I do, that this is going to be one of the most exciting, information-jammed events that we've ever had. And at the end of the weekend, I think what we need to do is we will have seen each other's talks. Let's get on stage and we'll have the big discussion where we really kind of hash this out in terms of, like, what do we know and where are we going?
I would love that. In fact, I will look very much forward to that.
Awesome.
Of course, listeners can go to divinecosmos.com for more information about this Tempe, Arizona convergence. William Henry, David Wilcock. David, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been my pleasure.